We're going to move to our final session. We're going to do a discussion about public interest and how catastrophic models can serve the public interest. And then I'll do some closing remarks, and we're looking to wrap up just around 4 o'clock. So we're going to do this rather quickly. So Laurie, John, if I can have you come and join us. We're going to do this without slides. I just have one slide to introduce Laurie and John, and then we're just going to have a conversation. So Dr. Laurie Metters is a professor of economics at she's the Joseph Friedman Distinguished Professor of Insurance at Appalachian State University. She was past chair of the Florida Commission on Hurricane Loss Protection Methodology, which will be relevant, I think, for today's conversation. John Schneider is the Secretary General of the Global Earthquake Model Foundation. John is joining us from Italy. So it is very late for John here today, and thank you for joining us. So I'm going to turn off the slides and the sharing. And hopefully, John, I see you, and Laurie, I see you. Wonderful. That's great. So I'm going to invite Laurie to go first and just share some thoughts, and then John will share some thoughts, and then 3 of us will just have a conversation about models in the public interest. Laurie, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Paul. It's good to be with you today. I'll be honest, we're having a thunderstorm where I am, and so hopefully we do not have any technical problems. I've got a little weird lighting going on as a result, but we'll hope for the best here. As Paul mentioned, I'm a professor of risk management and insurance, and I also teach and research in economics of uncertainty a little more broadly. But prior to my work at my current university, I served at Florida State University for several years, from 2008 actually until 2017. And while I was in Florida, I was asked by the state of Florida, the Chief Financial Officer of Florida, to serve on the Florida Commission on Hurricane Loss Projection Methodology, which some of you may have heard of and some of you may not have. And I think it's really in that capacity that I'm here with you today, primarily, is to discuss the insights I gained from serving on that commission and then going on to chair that commission for several years. So I served as statistics expert and then went on to chair the commission during a pivotal period of time when we were actually adding to sort of the charge of the commission, not only looking at hurricane loss projection methodologies, but also flood loss methodologies more generally, which would include hurricane-induced flood, but also inland flood. And this is one of the richest experiences I've ever had, so I'm a little biased toward the experience anyway, but I want to share with you and try to step back and be as third-party objective as I can, what some of my takeaways are as to what the value is of a process like that Florida Commission to developing improved insights, to developing better models, to developing better trust with the public. And so I'll just kind of start there. So this commission, the history, very brief history, is that following Hurricane Andrew, which was in 1992, for those of you that might not recall that, by 1995, the state of Florida legislature created this Commission on Hurricane Loss Projection Methodology, and they created it for the purpose of improving computer models and improving actuarial methodologies through an independent expert panel. And what it became throughout that legislative session was really an independent panel of experts that would vet models and determine their acceptability under a set of standards that were created by a panel of experts for use in Florida, by insurers in setting residential property insurance rates. So effectively, an insurer needed to wait to see whether a particular hurricane loss model was found acceptable by this commission, and this is still true today, before the insurer can use that model in order to set residential property insurance rates within the state of Florida. So that's kind of a big charge and a big responsibility that this commission has to serve the public, to serve the state, to be fair to modelers, to be fair to insurers. And so it was set up to be an independent group, a mixed panel of experts from meteorology, statistics, vulnerability. So that would be, in the case of hurricanes, and engineering background. Some of the directors of some of the state entities that would be constituents of the model. And so there's a voting group that was an independent panel of experts, and there is a professional team. So there are two different groups that make this process and this commission work, and I think that's an important thing to point out. So a model goes through this process. It's submitted by the modeler that wants to have their model found acceptable. There's a submission process. It's rigorous, it's lengthy. And the professional team then, once the submission is received from the modeler, there's a professional team from the commission, and that is a compensated team. It basically goes on site. It reviews the submission, but then also goes on site and visits with that modeler where they live, and allows the modeler's team, as many people as they have that they've got devoted to the model they're trying to have found acceptable, they can go and spend time with that modeler and let the modeler and the modeler's team express in their home territory, basically, how they've put the model together, what the expertise is of the team, how they protect the model, what the computer and information security standards are. And then that team writes a report, brings it back to the voting expert panel membership of the commission. And there are meetings over several days where the modeler comes to the commission. So comes to Florida in person prior to COVID, and sits with the actual commission. And the commission, I think the current set of standards is numbering 34. So there are 34 standards that a model has to meet in order to be deemed acceptable by the commission. And these standards range from general standards about modeler expertise all the way to computer standards and the meteorology, vulnerability, statistical and actuarial standards that fall in between. So there are 34, as I last counted, standards that must be met. And if a model fails to be found acceptable on any one of those 34 standards, then the model is not acceptable for use in the state of Florida setting residential property insurance rates. So this is sort of an all or nothing. You pass all, in a sense, or not found acceptable. And so that is, sounds harsh, but I think what I found in serving on this commission was that, and I think most modelers would agree, that in serving on this commission, I found really three very cool things happen. First of all, the models do get better. So the modelers themselves, I think, in preparation for submission each time, and there's a biannual submission process, and in preparation for submission, I think the modelers are out in front of that thinking about what can we be doing better? Where did the commission find that we had some weaknesses the last time they reviewed us? Are those really substantive in our minds, or are those administrative issues, and how do we best deal with those? And I think, my opinion is that propelled the models to get better. As we know, the models are going to have wide variability in their outcomes, results potentially, and certainly they'll have variability in their approaches, in their methodologies. They'll have variability in the assumptions made within the models, and that's all fine. So you could have very differing methodologies and assumptions, two different models, and both models be found acceptable by the commission based on its standards, its minimum standards that a model must meet. But each model has a sense of where the commission may see weaknesses. And each model has a sense of where, I think they get a fairly good sense of where the commission may see them as being strong or doing well. And so I think that process, it protects proprietary information of the modelers. But aside from proprietary information is a very public forum for vetting these models. And again, I think as a result makes the models better. The second really cool thing that I take away from having served on that commission is that because it was a public forum, other than for closed meetings where we were discussing proprietary model information, because of the public forum, I think that there was a building of public trust. These meetings of the commission where they vetted the models, where they were reviewing the models, these meetings were for the most part public, again, except for when there was a closed meeting pre-agreed because of proprietary information sharing. But there was always an open meeting as part of the review process for every modeler, where to the extent they could share what was going on with that model and within the modeler operations, they could share anything that wasn't proprietary, deemed proprietary, and could really then not only offer insights to the public, to the press, to other interested constituents, but offer a credibility to the process because of the transparency that took place in that. The third really nice, I think, not direct result of this commission, but related to the work of the commission, was that Florida developed a public model for hurricane loss projection. And part of the beginnings of having this public model and the state spending money to support a public model was to use it as a check and balance to be sure that the modelers who were commercial for-profit modelers were not estimating losses that were unrealistically high or somehow did not yield reliable results, were not using a verifiable or credible process. And what we found over time is that even though I think that public model has been extremely helpful in offering some cutting edge insights, because it doesn't really have proprietary information, you can really see under the hood of all of it. It has offered insights to the other modelers, and it has offered insights to the other constituents in the process. A really cool thing about this is that the transparency of that has really resulted in the public being less suspicious of the commercial modelers. I think the press is less suspicious than they would otherwise be. State regulators are less suspicious than they might otherwise be because of the transparency of the process and because we have a public model that can be sort of used as a check and balance against the other models. So I'll leave my introductory remarks there and allow John to speak for a few minutes as well, and then we'll take questions about that.
Thanks, Laurie. John, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Laurie. This has been a really good opportunity to be part of this panel, and I think it's fair to say we've already seen quite a bit of sharing of information today, and particularly nice to see amongst modelers that are directly competing with one another as well. So I think the move towards openly sharing information is really being adopted to some degree quite widely. GEM in itself is a nonprofit public-private partnership, and we're devoted specifically to improving earthquake risk assessment and reducing and contributing to reducing risk worldwide. We develop data, models, tools, and we share them, disseminate them widely. Our modeling software, Quake, is used worldwide by academic, government, and private sector organizations for developing models, as well as for analyzing risk for many applications: insurance, reinsurance, building codes, building design, nuclear safety, disaster response and planning, community awareness, education, outreach. So the applications and the users ultimately are spread far and wide. For GEM, I think the open approach has been fundamental in developing partnerships, as I think was suggested also by Laurie, and in developing the capacity to do hazard and risk assessments across sectors and stakeholder groups. Ultimately, the approach has lowered the threshold for a wider range of players to be involved in risk assessment and in understanding and using those models. Ultimately, it's greatly accelerated the transition from research to application, and has broadened the scope of applications. So, we're fast tracking research directly into models and their use in, as we've seen today, information is being taken up and digested very quickly if it's openly available. So open models are transparent, they're testable, they're comparable, as others have said. They're thus potentially more reliable and robust, more eyes looking at them. Ideally, for us too, we feel that co-development can be a great benefit. Models are open for others to modify them, to propose different interpretations, or to value add them. Public and private organizations are much more open to sharing data if they know they will be involved with the development process, and they have full awareness of assumptions, and they have access to results. So everybody benefits. As Laurie said, the co-ownership and this process builds trust. And if the information comes from a trusted source, it's much more likely to be used. So we're not only talking about getting better models, we're talking about actually mechanisms for assuring that they're used and they're applied in decision-making and ultimately make a difference in disaster risk reduction, including insurance, people taking up insurance. Models can be adapted, they can be extended and approved, and this is where the private sector benefits as well. Private companies can focus on developing better derived products, secondary hazards and risks that we've seen quite a bit of today. And so everybody benefits by bringing the level of the conversation up a level. I think we've seen today that that the modelers are using open data and models to some degree, and I dare say almost everybody's using some of GEM's stuff as part of the ingredients for their models. The products ultimately become more diverse, more applicable, and again, the take-up is further and further downstream, as we're now seeing in Canada with the work that NRCan is doing, all the way down to local government and so forth. So GEM models are ultimately trusted as coming from an authoritative source without any particular bias or application or vested interest. The approach also fosters collaboration across sectors. And again, what's happening in Canada is a really good example of how this open collaboration works. And with leadership from NRCan, the Canadian government a number of years ago established the GEM Canada Committee. They also created their own logo, the GEM Canada logo, which I think you saw on Tegan's slides. This committee and the group of organizations involved promotes the dissemination of models and tools, supports the development of value-added products, and ultimately Canada, I think, has become quite an exemplar of how this process can work very synergistically from global to national to local level. So thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you, John.
Paul.
So our time has gone really quickly, but we're not done. We're going to have a short conversation here, but our time is going to go quickly. So, Laurie, can I start with you, please? Laurie, your experience in Florida, and I'm sure your continuing interest in following what's going on in Florida. The process today is not the process that was probably done the first day or the first idea of what a commission might look like in Florida. It's evolved over time. Your sense of where it's got to, does that feel like something that would benefit in Canada? Florida, there's a natural concern about hurricanes. Canada, we're concerned about a very large earthquake. You were describing a number of aspects of your experience with the commission that you were very proud of where they came to. Do you think some of the learning that's happened in Florida can be brought to another jurisdiction like Canada relatively easily, so we don't have to start and maybe repeat some mistakes or things that eventually change? There's a chance to start with a model that's pretty far along.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking this question, because I left a bit out in my introductory remarks for this. This fits nicely, and And in the interest of time, first I'll say anyone can go look, again, very public process, anyone can go look at the details of this commission in Florida at www.sbafla.com, the state's business administration offices. And so anything I'm saying, you can go look up for yourself, but my opinion, absolutely. So I think this is very doable in other states. And you might ask, well, why don't other states bother to do what Florida did then? I think what's fascinating is what I found, especially in chairing the commission in Florida, is that other states piggybacked to an extent on what Florida was doing. You know, it's not a zero cost proposition to create a commission like that, but it's also and budget information is transparently online and available for you to see as well. It's not as costly as one might assume that it would be, I think. And yet other states looked to Florida and said, well, let's see. And I think there were a number of other states that would invoke Florida in conversations around you know, what their feelings were about certain models. Now that isn't necessarily the best outcome of a commission, but I think my point here is not that, it's great that other states would do that, because their risk, their exposure and the risk characteristics are a bit different than Florida. So they need to be careful about that. But the point is, what I think speaks well of it is that they thought enough of the process and how it had evolved in Florida that it had not only had credibility within Florida, but I think had credibility elsewhere, to the point that a lot of other states looking, you know, at the proposition of spending the same money said, well, we can kind of look at what Florida's doing and have some confidence that models that, let's say, are acceptable in Florida, you know, we have confidence that they are at least doing the minimum acceptable process for us to be able to look at rates that insurers are charging in the state based on that model and feel, okay, that's based on a reasonable process. What I find in terms of thinking about it as used for something like earthquake, or as used for flood, or vetting models that are looking at other perils, is that it started beautifully as a process where really the commission wanted to learn what the modelers were doing. So they learned from the models, what are you doing? And based on that knowledge of what the modelers' capabilities were, what they were doing at the time, they both developed standards based on, again, what the modelers could do and were doing at the time, sort of as a collective. They based their first set of standards largely on that, but also being compelled by the panel of experts to say, hey, modeler, consider this for the future. Consider thinking about this or thinking about that. There's a cutting edge paper that you could look at and think about doing things differently in the future. And so there's been a very nice, I think, evolution of insights that have been circular between modelers and the commission and other constituents to the commission. And so the evolution of it, I think, has been very nice. It started with, we want to learn what you're doing. And by the time it really became a hard set of standards and a rigorous process for modelers, I think the modelers felt like they had had a lot of input and there was a lot of buy-in to that process.
Thank you, Laurie.
Well,
John, I had a couple questions for you. If I can start with sort of a tone that we set right at the beginning today, was one about there are some decision makers in Canada that are concerned about earthquakes, and they need to use models. They can't use recent history to tell them what the next earthquake is going to look like. What's your sense from your experience about the quality of models today in terms of their ability to inform the decision-making process, to put out estimates that people can be confident in and believe in? Your general sense on the state of modeling today, where we've got to, and where we might go in the next few years.
Okay, not too tough question. Look, the state of modeling has obviously increased quite rapidly, and we saw great examples of how models are are developing and evolving, and in the sharing of information today across the four groups that we're presenting on models. And building on a base, the base is growing and growing, and the ability to do calculations and build models is certainly sophisticated. Some also said, look, we still are lacking data. We don't have, we need more earthquakes to actually have better models. We need more, understanding of impacts. But I think another thing that's happening with models is, and we're seeing it in the public applications now, that moving away from the purely insurance applications, we're starting to move much more into other disaster management applications. So looking at disaster response, looking at for instance, cost benefit of doing retrofit applications in Vancouver and in San Francisco and other places that's being done. Looking at other disaster management opportunities in planning, reducing future risk, not only mitigating the past risk. These are all things that are really starting to increase and really improve in the public domain, and having available insurance. The two are synergistically related. So if you have better models, you have better engagement with the public, you have better attention to mitigation, you're going to have more interest in having insurance solutions. So in reducing the insurance gap, all these things are starting to come together much better. A long way to go, but I think it's improving. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, John. One more question for John, one for Laurie, and then we're going to have to move to a wrap up because we're past 4 o'clock here. John, the overall, you were just sharing your sense of the maturity of modeling, how far we have come. At the moment, you have the opportunity to work on open source models. That's your mandate, that's your focus, but you work with the private sector models regularly. Tell me about how they're learning from each other, how the dialogue, having a conversation today where we had everybody around the table is new for Canada. Everybody here is very experienced talking about their own model, but to do it together and have this kind of conversation is new for Canada. Just talk about the relationship between open source, private sector, and how that's moving modeling capacity.
Yeah, and I've been involved with GEM almost since the very beginning, where we've been around almost 12 years now. I've been heading GEM for the last 5 years, and it's really interesting to see how the public and private sectors interact with one another. The private sector is definitely becoming more open, more willing to share. That the particular organizations that have been around the table for 10 or more years now are working more closely together. We make models that we develop, and obviously the software available to them. They give us feedback. Sometimes they work together to improve things. There's lots of area for collaboration, and I think amongst the partners, there's no question that having an open process of some kind is and being part of GEM is actually beneficial to their business. We're now in the process of trying to make some of our models more directly accessible to the insurance industry by putting them into third-party platforms for to include financial loss analysis and exposure model input that is more aligned with the insurance use. And so working with AIR, working with NASDAQ, we also do some work with Aon. And in fact, they're working with them in Canada. I think these are also other opportunities for taking the information that we've developed and leveraging it directly into models and other platforms where the insurance industry will have direct access to models as an opportunity to benchmark, for instance, our models against theirs and do comparisons that they have not done in the past. So
Wonderful. Thank you, John. Laurie, a last question for you. Unfortunately, we're short here on time. I have shared with you that the Florida conversation following Hurricane Andrew dealt with models from a number of perspectives, but usually started with a conversation about rate fairness. The Canadian conversation about models began with a focus on solvency. And could we find a process to be informing insurance companies that they have enough reinsurance or they've done the right things that they will survive a very low probability, high consequence event, and allowing regulatory oversight and management oversight. Models in Canada are used for many purposes, but solvency is usually the first part of the conversation. Is there anything about a solvency perspective relative to a rate perspective that would change your views about the commission, the benefits of how to look at models from a third-party perspective, just to build confidence in models? Does it matter whether you're looking from a solvency point of view relative to a rating point of view?
Yeah, this is really interesting because you're so right about the difference maybe in the original, originating purpose. The standards that the commission uses today incorporate data and require forms to be completed that not only get after what the average annual losses are estimated to be, but also what the probable maximum losses are estimated to be, and exceedance values. And so to the extent that I think you have the ability within a process like that to focus more on either or in the process, and you can set, hurricanes are different from earthquakes anyway, but whether you're wanting to look at a 1 in 100-year event or a 1 in 250 or 1 in 500-year event, you can certainly set the process with a mind toward gathering data and analyzing it however you want to. So to answer your question, I would say the simple answer is yes, I think it can be used for either. And I think in Florida, it's sort of evolved to become useful for both, despite the fact that its intent, the commission's intent is not to regulate, and the intent is not to, certainly then not to regulate solvency. But I think that a lot of the information coming from the submissions of the modelers to the commission, that information has been utilized by lots of folks all over the US for purposes that probably are related to solvency. They probably are gaining information about solvency of insurers from that. And so, or gaining insights at least. So I think, absolutely, yes, you can use it for either of these purposes. The information is simply going to differ. What you require as standards might differ somewhat, but that's just part of the process, is deciding what you want to set your standards related to. But we do, in Florida, it has been used indirectly for insights on both of those fronts.
Thank you, Laurie. So Laurie and John, I've got to close this. There's much more I would love to speak with you about, and we'll get a chance. Just it won't unfortunately be today, but thank you so much for making the time to be with us and participate. I'm going to do some closing remarks for everybody really quickly because we have gone over time. I apologize for that. But I thank all of the people who've tuned in to join us today. We were here for you to share our experience and our learning with all of you. And I hope this has been a really helpful experience. A driving force for the Institute for more than a year now is that the basic science, the science about the hazard of shaking and fire, the science about the risk that that hazard turns into a loss because of vulnerability or production, has changed, and changed quite a bit in the last, our understanding in the last period of time. So today, but we've held a series of different events through our programs on fire following presentations by Dr. Scawthorne. He's done a couple of those in the past year. We've had presentations by Michael Collage and Murray Journey and others, sharing with you the new science to help everyone better understand how the risk has changed and evolved. So thank you for joining us in that journey, and I hope you've had a chance to better understand. Sometimes the science changes materially, which it has now, And that's important, and for those in the insurance industry, but those also who follow from other different perspectives, understanding what the changes are and taking the time to learn about that. The Institute is always there to try to help with that process, but we're glad that you're tuning in and listening and aware that the science is different than it was not too long ago. Critical to that is the role of the modeling companies. And I'm so proud that we were able to bring everybody together today. I have a very different kind of event. Each of the companies on their own are always willing to share and sometimes personalize what they're giving to you. But today was an opportunity for you to get different perspectives from the modeling community. The modeling community not only includes companies that have been doing this for a long period of time, like RMS and AIR and CoreLogic, so thank you. But new is the NRCan open source Canadian model, bringing a different perspective, new information on the same risk that is just enriching the discussion about earthquake risk in Canada, and in particular, taking this information to those in the public sector who need to have this quantified and put into a form so they can make good decisions. So our goal today was to share with you that the science has changed, share with you how the modeling companies are approaching and dealing with this. They are bringing in this new information into their model. Very important was them being able in their own words to tell you some of the change that is being presented as new to builders and engineers or whatever that is brand new through the building code process. For the modeling companies, this was sometimes anticipated, and they saw it coming, and they've built it into their models a few years ago, even if it only became an official part of the Canadian dialogue during the course of the last number of months. So the modeling companies were able to speak in their own words about how their processes anticipate some risks and where there's still some work to be done, and they will always be working to improve and bring new information. So I want to close by thanking everybody who tuned in today. It's so exciting. We have more than 100 people still with us after this long session. So thank you for staying with us through all of this conversation. Enormous thank you to all of our guests who made the time to think through their thoughts and be with us here today and present and share their views from many different perspectives and to talk in their own voice. A special thanks to Alistair, Michael, and Charlie, who organized specific panel conversations, made of their time to speak with our guests and organize what information would be informative and helpful to everybody. So a huge thank you to everybody who was involved today. And stay tuned. I hope that this was not a one-off event that closes the conversation. I hope that this is a process where as we continue to learn, as we recognize that the science about earthquake evolves, that is shared and discussed, and that the modeling community and the role of models continues to be part of a conversation. This is a process that is really important in Canada, but I think there's scope to put an even greater spotlight on the role of models and how they're used going forward. So with that, thank you to one and all for your time today. My apology for going slightly over today, but your participation was really important. We are making a copy of today's event, so for anybody who wants to go back and see the slides, see the presentation, and hear the comments made, that'll all be on our website very soon. And if you have more questions, please be in touch with us directly. So with that, thank you to one and all, and I'm going to close today's session. All the very best. Take care.
Thanks, Paul.